Into the house of the Lord. All right, we've been studying the book of Judges. Last time we went over chapter 13. We've been getting into Samson. Notes my phone. Trying to get my notes. So last time, Samson's parents wanted to know what we're to do to order the child. The angel of the Lord said, "Everything I've commanded you." His head could not be shaven; no razor was to come upon his head. He was to his mom and nor him while she bare him bear him for 9 months. She wasn't allowed to drink any wine, strong drink, not eat of any. She was not allowed to eat of any unclean thing. Went to Samson too. Law of the Nazarite. Samson he was prophesied to be a Nazarite from birth to death. And we're going to get into that. The Nazarite, one of the key things to the vow of the Nazarite was you had to make a vow and fulfill it. Well, Samson made a vow, and God didn't require it of Samson because he knew that towards the end of Samson's life, Samson would make a vow and would fulfill it. So he let Samson do that on his own. Let's see here. They called him Samson, which means sunlight, or that could also be translated as light of God. The light. He was. I'm summarizing chapter 13, and then we're going to get into 14 and 15. Now, Samson's name means sunlight, so he's meant to be a light or a beacon of hope to God's people, that the light of God would just shine through him. Manoah was his father. They named him Samson. He went. The Spirit of the Lord began to move him between Zorah and Eshtaol. Now we're getting into chapter 14. This is when Samson's grown. And Samson went down to Timnath, which Timnath means an assigned portion. It was a portion assigned. It was a place given when they were recovering the promised land. It was one of the portions assigned to the children of God. And he saw a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. And it came to pass, he told his father and mother, and said, I have seen a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me to wife. This is chapter 14. Then his father and his mother said unto him, Is there never a woman among the daughters of thy brethren, or among thy people, all my people, that thou goest to take a wife of the uncircumcised Philistine? And Samson said unto his father, Get her for me, for she pleaseth me. But his father and mother knew not that it was of the Lord, that he sought an occasion against the Philistines, for at this time the Philistines had dominion over Israel. So, they did a burnt sacrifice to God in the previous chapter in honor of the angels, God sending the angel to speak to them. So Manoah and his wife were a couple that knew the laws of God and believed in the laws of God. They also knew they also knew the history of God's people. They understood the laws of God, and that God in the past hadn't wanted the children to mingle in with the Canaanites because that sin would go down their lineage. That sin would continue for generations until they came back to God. They knew that God didn't want any sin mingled in with his children. They're idolaters, and the key sin was that they worshipped idols, or what the Bible, it's false gods, or what the book of Leviticus says are demons. They were devils in disguise. So really, idolatry is demon worship, and they didn't want their son involved with these idolaters. So they were asking him, "Why can't you find a wife among our people?" He told them, "She pleaseth me." Now, unto his father and his mother, they didn't know that the Lord sought an occasion against the Philistines, because the Philistines had a very harsh and tyrannic dominion over the children of God. So it was actually the will of the Lord that he felt that way. So then went Samson down and his father and his mother to Timnath, and came to the vineyards of Timnath, and behold, a young lion roared against him. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and he rent him as he would rent a kid, that is a small goat. Rent means tore. He tore the lion in half. And he had nothing in his hand, but he told not his father and mother what he had done. Now, there's a reason, again, why he didn't tell his mother and father about this. His mom and dad, there was rules in the Old Testament about clean and unclean animals, what you could touch and what you couldn't. I believe it's in Leviticus chapter 11, the Levitical laws. The children of God were not allowed to touch any animals that were on all four legs and had paws. They weren't allowed to eat them. They weren't allowed to touch any carcasses of them or any bones. Well, he had killed this lion, and he didn't tell his father and his mother, but the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he killed the lion. Esau was a hunter, but so it's permitted to hunt animals according to the Word of God, but you were supposed to stay. You weren't supposed to eat unclean animals, and you were supposed to stay away from the carcasses. So he didn't tell his parents about that, and he was humble. He didn't tell his parents what he had done. And after this time he returned to take her, and turned aside to see the carcass of the lion. And behold, there was a swarm of bees and honey in the carcass of the lion. And he took thereof in his hands, and went on eating, and came to his father and mother, and gave them, and they did eat. But he told not them that he had taken the honey out of the carcass of the lion. He didn't tell them because the lion was unclean to eat. He didn't want them thinking that the honey was unclean as well. Some may argue the honey was preserved, but rather I say there was no sin here. There was no uncleanliness, because Samson had faith that God not only would provide, but that God did provide. Just like David with the shewbread, when he went into the temple and gave his hungry soldiers shewbread that was reserved for the priests. He was believing that God would provide for their every need. And so here Samson was believing that God was providing for his needs. So he did what he did, not to break the law, rather it was done out of faith. He didn't tell his parents because, again, according to the laws, he knew they wouldn't he knew that they would think that he had sinned, so he didn't let them know. But when the Lord moves mightily with you and comes upon you, when the Lord is on your side, you know that you're in the right. You have to have favor with God. You have to be in good standing with God, and that also means, and he'll get into this later. We'll see this here in a minute in chapter 15, but let me be more blameless than the Philistines is what Samson said. And that was a prayer to find favor with God. So So he was still in good standing with God. And he took thereof his hands and went on eating, and came to his father and mother. He gave them to eat. He did not tell them the honey came out of the carcass of the lion. Verse 10, so his father went down to the woman and unto the woman, and Samson made there a feast, for so used the young men to do. And it came to pass, when they saw him, they brought 30 companions with him. And Samson said unto them, I will now put forth a riddle unto you. If you can certainly declare it me within 7 days of the feast, and find it out, then I will give you 30 sheets and 30 change of garments. But if you cannot declare it me, and then shall ye give me 30 sheets, then shall ye give me 30 sheets and 30 change of garments. And they said unto him, put forth thy riddle, that we may hear it. And he said unto them, out of the eater come forth meat, out of the strong come forth sweetness. And they could not in 3 days expound the riddle. And it came to pass that on the 7th day that they said unto Samson's wife, entice thy husband, that he may declare unto us the riddle. That is, please him. So he will declare unto us the riddle, lest we burn thee and thy father's house down with fire. Have ye not called to take what we have? Is it not so? And Samson's wife wept before him, and said, thou dost but hate me, and lovest me not. Thou hast put forth a riddle unto the children of my people, and hast not told it to me. And he said unto her, behold, I have not told it to my father nor my mother, shall I tell it thee? Samson wasn't as... God was seeking an occasion against the Philistines, but at the same time, Samson wasn't necessarily the best husband. He didn't have a good idea what marriage was supposed to be. Even though his parents were married, he was not a very... He, for here, he wasn't... He had left his wife for some months, and then the father thought he had hated his wife. We'll get into that here in a second, but he didn't understand that when out of marriage, you keep secrets between each other, you keep secrets with each other, but you don't keep them from each other, and that anything he told should have been told to her before it was told to his mother or father. And so he said, shall I tell it thee? I didn't tell my mother or my father, shall I tell it thee? And she wept before him the 7 days while the feast lasted. And it came to pass on the 7th day that he told her, because she lay sore upon him. And she told him the riddle, and she told the riddle to the children of her people. And the men of the city said unto him on the 7th day, before the sun went down, what is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion? And he said unto them, if ye had not plowed with my heifer, ye had not found out my riddle. Now that he was describing, this is another questionable thing he did. He was referring to his wife as a beast of burden. Had you not put this burden on her and drove her to lay sore upon me for days and get the riddle from me, then you wouldn't have known it. He was telling them, that's what that phrase means. He told that to them, that they put more on her than what she could bear. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon and slew 30 men of them, and took their spoil, and gave exchange of garments of them which expounded the riddle. And his anger was kindled, and he went up to his father's house. But Samson's wife was given to his companion, whom he had used as a friend. So the Spirit of the Lord was upon him, which meant God was with him. But for some reason, his spouse was given to his companion. Well, we're going to see here we're going to start on chapter 15. But it came to pass within a while after, in the time of wheat harvest, that Samson visited his wife with a kid. So he had waited a while before going to visit his wife. So his it would have been some time, which is what led the father-in-law to give his daughter away. Again, see Samson, and he said, I will go into my wife into the chamber, but her father would not suffer him to go in. And her father said, I verily thought that thou hast utterly hated her. Therefore I gave her to thy companion. Is not her younger sister fairer than she? Take her, I pray thee, instead of her. So not only did he had essentially left a good space in between there, not checking on his wife, not looking for her. So the father-in-law was under the impression Samson hates her. He doesn't want her. Then the father-in-law did a dishonesty and did not respect the covenant of their marriage. So he gave the daughter away to somebody else. Now this as well, now throughout all this, the Lord is seeking an occasion against the Philistines. He's still moving Samson against the Philistines for the sake of his people. But it came to pass, and Samson said concerning them, now I shall be more blameless than the Philistines, though I do them a displeasure. So he is doing them a disservice, a displeasure, but at the same time he said, now I'll be more blameless than them. For what they have done, Lord, let me be avenged. This was back in the old days where it was an eye for an eye. Jesus said in the New Testament it is no longer that way. When he came, he changed our circumstances so that we no longer had to seek an eye for an eye. In the Old Testament, that's how it was done. When someone did wrong against you, like when someone was murdered, that person themselves was to be put, or murdered someone, that person themselves was to be put to death. In this case, they not only, they basically harassed his wife, and then they told then his father-in-law gave his wife away. So he said, now I shall be more blameless than the Philistines. Now I shall find more favor with God than the Philistines. Which was also another reason that was easier to do, is because even though God had given the Philistines rule over the Israelites, the Philistines still served false gods. They didn't serve. Samson served God, and Samson was raised up as a judge. The Word of God says that he makes the times and the seasons. He lifts up kings and gives wisdom unto the wise. So all rulers, including judges, are lifted up by God. So this is God's chosen here, God's anointed, who has God's favor. He's saying, let me have more favor than them, although they have rule over me. Let me overcome them. And God gave him favor to overcome the Philistines. Back in this day, if God wasn't on your side, you didn't win the battle. As a matter of fact, that's true to say to this day too. If God's not on your side, you don't win the battle. So Samson was praying this because he wanted to make sure God was on his side against the Philistines, so he'd win the battle. And he said, now shall I be more blameless than the Philistines, though I do them a displeasure. And Samson went and caught 300 foxes, and took firebrands, and turned tail to tail, and put a firebrand in the midst between two tails. So he tied their tails together and put a firebrand in the middle of them. And Samson went and caught 300 foxes, and took firebrands, and turned tail to tail, and put a firebrand in the midst between two tails. And when he had set the brands on fire, he let them go in the standing corn of the Philistines, and burnt up both the shocks and also the standing corn with the vineyards and olives. Shocks are piles, heaps of corn. So he burned up the piles of corn along with the standing corn. Then the Philistines said, who hath done this? And they answered, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he had taken his wife and given her to his companion. And the Philistines came up and burnt her and her father with fire. Well, this angered Samson too, because he believed he was well, in his heart he was still married. This angered Samson. He said, and Samson said unto them, verse 7, though you have done this, yet I will be avenged of you, and after that I will cease. So you basically, you took my father-in-law, my wife, you burned him to death, now God's going to avenge me of you. And smote them hip and thigh with a great slaughter, and he went down and dwelt on the top of the rock Edom. Edom was a rock. It was where the hawks perched at. The name of Edom means hawk ground, so it was where the hawks perched at. Then the Philistines went up and pinched in Judah and spread themselves in Lehi. Now, Lehi means the softness of a cheek, or by implication, the jawbone. I sincerely believe that name was given prophetically for what Samson would do there years later. And they said unto him, then 3,000 men of Judah went on top of the rock Edom, and said unto Samson, knowest thou not that the Philistines are rulers over us? What is this that thou hast done unto us? And he said unto them, as they did unto me, so I have done unto them. And they said unto him, we are come down to bind thee, that we may deliver thee into the hands of the Philistines. And Samson said unto them, swear unto me that you will not fall upon me yourselves. That is, you will not kill me yourselves. Fall upon meaning stabbing while they're on the ground. To fall upon someone, to slay them. And and they spake unto him, saying, no, but we will bind thee fast and deliver thee into their hand, but surely we will not kill thee. And they bound him with 2 new cords and brought him up from the rock. And when he came to Lehi, the place that was called Jawbone, the Philistines shouted out against him, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and the cords that were upon his arms became as flax that was burnt with fire, and his bands loosed from off his hands. So he broke his bands. Essentially, the bands were rendered useless because God had blessed him with great strength. And he found a new jawbone of an ass, and put forth his hand, and took it, and slew 1,000 men therewith. So prophetically, that is where the name Lehi comes in, because I believe it was prophetic. God knew one day that Samson would take the jawbone and slay the 1,000 Philistines. And Samson said, with the jawbone of an ass, heaps upon heaps, with the jaw of an ass have I slain 1,000 men. And it came to pass, when he had made an end of speaking, that he had cast away the jawbone out of his hand, and called the place Ramath Lehi. That is the height of a jawbone, because he raised up the jawbone against the Philistines. And he was sore athirst, and called on the Lord, and said, thou hast given me this great deliverance into the hand of thy servant, and now shall I die of thirst, and fall into the hand of the uncircumcised. So he was pretty worked up. I'd imagine he worked up a sweat. He was thirsty, he was dried out, and he was tired. He needed God to give him water. So he was asking him, shall I die of thirst? He needed refreshed. But God clave, verse 19, but God clave a hollow place that was in the jaw, and there came water thereout, and when he had drunk, his spirit came again, and he revived. Wherefore he called the name of the place En-hakkore, which is in Lehi unto this day. And he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years. So God gave him water that revitalized him, because God is the living water. He gave him the water that essentially brought Samson. It revived him. It revitalized him. It helped him perk back up and brought him back to life, because he was weary. And En-hakkore, the name he called the name of the place En-hakkore, which means fountain of one calling, or fountain of one that calls. He called it En-hakkore because that is the fountain of it. The water came out of the jawbone. He called that the fountain that I called forth, or the fountain that I called for, and then God answered his prayers. So that's what En-hakkore means, the fountain of one calling. It stands for what that place stands for what Samson did that day and called forth the Lord for a drink of water. He judged Israel 20 years. We'll get into, that's chapter 13, 14, and 15. We'll get into chapter 16 next time. Any questions?